All right. Oh, come on. Are you the stream manager? Oh, jeez. Oh, I gotta open this too. Where's my damn pencil? Oh, there it is. Okay. I was gonna put on some music, but I just don't feel like dealing with it right now. We got an ad starting in 5 minutes, so I'll just take this time to chill in the meantime. Maybe I will just go grab some music real quick. Because, fuck it, why not? We're just gonna talk about some character design notes today. And I'm gonna be doing some more like breakdowns while I'm doing shit today. So we'll talk a little bit about it. There we go. I also fiddled around a little bit with my audio settings in OBS because I forgot that there are noise filters and such. Uh, Everyday's learning experience. But yeah. So we got 2 minutes until the ad. I might just run the ad now, and take the opportunity to go make sure there's nothing else that I need to do or grab before I get really into things. So I think that's the plan. Just give me a moment here. All right. I do that. So, um, as far as what we're doing today. I got bored last night and started doing like a character study slash breakdown of one of my own characters. I did this entire thing, like actually taking detailed notes for like her head and general shapes and things. And then somewhere in the middle of it, I was like, this could be pretty cool stream content. Why does my window look like that? Besides the fact that OBS is apparently out to sabotage me today. Whatever. But yeah, so I was taking some notes on just like character design stuff because I realized I've never done it for anything that I've actually drawn. So I'm using my character Reigna as a general, I guess, practice model to work off of. Because I was thinking about like, simplifying the character design for the sake of like stuff like webcomic use. Because generally when you're doing something for either animation or for webcomics, things that you want to do is you want to cut down generally on excessive detail because you want to make sure that you can reproduce the character's design quickly for the sake of deadlines and not like overload yourself on, extra shit. So looking at the actual character's design, I was doing a study of her actual design notes to figure out things that I wanted to smooth over in her design that I realized I haven't really put a whole lot of thought into. Like her hair, just like general shapes of her clothes and certain accessories, and just facial structure stuff. So I started making some little notes. Now, I drew all this stuff on different layers and then basically just like merged it all onto one. And this little example drawing that I have over here of her full character design, I actually copy and pasted from my canvas where I was actually drawing that initially. And I just started like handling some little design details, which I'm gonna go over in red here a little bit. Like, I adjusted her eye shape a little bit to make it more defined. And I went for this, like, kind of parallelogram shape, generally, which you'll be able to see. Where... So, her eyes are going to have this, like, general parallelogram shape. Because her natural expression has her eyes kind of half-lidded. And that's done on purpose, because part of Reina's character is the fact that she's supposed to be... Her personality is very much like she's tired and kind of bored a lot of the time. Or she's not, like, mentally in the situation that she's in on a given moment, unless it calls for it. So, we give her this kind of distinct eye shape to communicate this aspect of her personality. It's also interesting because by keeping her eyes with this kind of half-lidded shape, it makes that anything that we do with her expression is going to look more drastic than it actually is. That's also why we give her these kind of like triangular eyebrows. Is just to communicate her expressions in a way that's more effective. Which, we'll talk about that when we actually start doing expression sheet stuff. But, the important thing is we have these these, like, shapes for her face. If you simplify the shape of her horns, you're going to get this kind of triangular shape. which is actually just a larger version of the shape for her eyebrows, which I've detailed down here. Like, her head is just a circle surrounded by little triangles, which, honestly, for me, from a perspective of studying the character, has actually been really fucking useful to think about how those shapes interact. You know, what shapes make up what part of her face. One thing that I did forget to do with her when it came to this little simplified facial structure here is that her face has this little, like, slope to it. But, like, this is it. This is the whole of her face as one structure. Or as a collection of primitive shapes. It's just circle, two triangles, and a weird little rectangle. So I've actually prepped a couple other sheets for the studies that we're going to do today. I've done one for upper body stuff and one for lower body, which I've literally just taken that primary image, moved it over, resized it, and removed the sections that I'm not going to be focusing on. And in this situation, we're also going to be working a little bit with her... We're going to be working a little bit on not only breaking down like parts of her body into primitive shapes, but we're also going to talk a little bit about... We're also going to talk a little bit about general costuming as well. You know, we'll be breaking down some of those shapes. So, we'll see. I'm going to start taking some notes down real quick on what we're going to be working on. And all these notes are primarily for me, but, you know, if you're somebody who's working on character design stuff, you can take anything that I'm doing here and try to do it on your own. It's actually, I think it's fairly worthwhile. I don't think you're going to find many people who disagree with the idea that if you're going to be drawing a character over and over again for any amount or reason in general, it's probably a good idea for you to explore that character's design and figure out what exactly it is you're doing with them. So, generally, whenever I'm taking these notes and doing this kind of thing, I put on the top of my note page, you know, what we're working on, and then I kind of put like a little bullet point list explaining what we're trying to do here. So, I'll go back to the previous page for all intents and purposes. So, on this first page, I specified, you know, we're doing head simplification. Originally, when I put this together, my intention was actually to redraw her entire character model, but in a more simplified fashion next to this one. And then I ended up focusing on the head, ran out of page space, decided to make it into a whole thing. So, in my notes, you know, because we're talking about simplifying a character, I put down what my initial goals were, which were simplify and animate, simplify clothing details in general, and establish and refine character silhouette. So, in this case, when talking about Reigna's head, I went through and basically broke down different aspects of her head into their primitive shapes, and then just tried to figure out aspects that I keep getting lost on when I try redrawing her, which is stuff like the flow of the shape of her horns. Because if you want to design a model sheet for a character, you want to draw a character and draw them from different angles, there are aspects of the character's body, like the flow of their shape language, which should always be the same unless we're doing something specific with expressions or situations. But even then, there are going to be some core elements that are never going to change with that character. So, one of those things, like looking at her horn structure, I'll go back to this. Her horn structure, this little curve shape, another curve up, and then a curve down. And if we come into this little crevice here, because there's a twist in her horns, it'll have this same kind of twisting motion downward. So now if I look at this in the profile view, all of those shapes and all of the flow of those shapes into each other should follow the same general pattern. So we're going up, another indent, curve up, curve down, and then where we have this twist, we have another downward curve. So now anytime I go to draw her horns again, no matter what angle I'm drawing from, that's the flow of that shape. The only time that this is going to be different is if I'm drawing her head from behind, because from behind, instead of curving, they're still going to curve outward, it's just going to be slightly different. Really, it's the inward curve that's going to be a little bit different because of the shape of the back of her head. And I need to figure out what the hell her hair looks like from the back, which is an issue that I'm going to run into because I gave her an asymmetrical hairstyle. That's entirely my fault. In retrospect, it was probably a stupid idea. But I like the idea that her hair is messy and asymmetrical. So, doing the upper body notes now. So, put down the notation. We're doing torso, upper body simplification. And then bullet points that I put down for that are, we're still going off of the previous image. We're continuing to refine character silhouette and try to establish it. The other thing we're doing is we're going to continue simplifying clothing details because unlike her head, there's not going to be a lot of clothing to explore there. Now that we're on the torso, this is where all the clothing details are going to become important. And then last but not least, we're going to be exploring shape language of the character torso and how the shape language of her torso, shoulders, and arms adds to the silhouette, how it's expressed in the silhouette. And generally speaking, when you're going through character design stuff, characters' designs top down are usually going to follow the same flow of shapes. So I established with Reigna's head that most of her shapes are going to be rounded shapes and triangular shapes, with the occasional addition of rectangles, squares, things of that nature, where necessary. So let's see how we explore that here. Like you can see, I've given her these kind of like these bell-shaped sleeves because Reigna's a bard. A technical name for the article of clothing that she's wearing is called a poet's shirt. I own one IRL. I'll do a rough sketch basically. So poet shirts are very loose fitting and billowy. They're usually made of cotton, like mine is. So when you're looking at one of these shirts, away from the rest of her outfit, this shirt, if it was by itself, you would have these little segments of it. So I'll just do a little rough sketch of the shirt itself real quick. So get like this little tunic section, more or less. And then it's got this kind of rounded collar. I gave hers a button just because I thought it would look nice, purely aesthetic purposes. But you know, one of these shirts, you're going to have a collar that kind of looks like this. You have this little bend here, like you would with any collared shirt. And then poet shirts usually have these little areas where you run a string through them. And this drawstring is how you close this little section here. And you can see on hers right now, I do have a little simplified indicator that this little string is there. And this is all that exists for the central section. But then when you get down to the rest of it, all of this stuff down here, it varies depending on the shirt maker or like the general style of poet shirt, because there's different eras that you would go that these are designed after. But a poet shirt or like a peasant shirt, there's going to be a lot of excess material that you have to tuck in. And then you get to the sleeves. The sleeves is where things always get fucky. So with poet shirts, the sleeves usually come down into this like really large bell shape, because they're supposed to be big and flowy. They're supposed to make it so that when you move your arms, you create these flourishing movements to capture people's attention. Because they're made for stage performing. So they have these like really large bell-shaped sleeves. And the sleeves start off at a taper on this end and then get wider towards the bottom. And then right at the bottom of this big negative space, there's a cuff, which is where your wrist is going to pop out. So Reigna's shirt is actually one of these, but it has this big bell shape up here at the top because she's tucking part of the material into her bracers. For my Ren Fair outfit, that's usually how I wear mine. I wear the shirt, I put the bracers on over it, I tuck the excess of the sleeves into the bracers. That actually creates this bell-shaped bulge at the top of the bracer around my shoulder. Generally makes for a more interesting silhouette for character design. I've also given hers a little bit of an additional flourish, which is I gave hers these little sections, which is basically just another like cinching drawstring like the one that's around the collar section, with this little bow here, because this is just how she ties them. And this is primarily done from a character perspective. Reigna does this to stop the sleeves from like bulging out of the bottom of her bracers and getting caught on things. So she gets these little extra strings that hold this bell shape in place. You can see we have our little, fold indicators. I'm not doing anything that detailed here because this is just supposed to be the shirt. I am, however, going to move the shirt. I'm actually going to shrink it down. This is our exploration / explanation of the shirt shape. Hello, welcome in. Also, for anyone who pays attention to the art showcase in the corner, I've added some new pieces to it. And by new, I mean like I've added the Pride pieces from last month to it, along with a few pieces that I just didn't initially have in the showcase. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, so now if we take this shape of this shirt that we've just created and we want to break it down into some primitive shapes, we have a couple areas where we can cut it down. So like up here at our collar, we have but is essentially a really short but wide cylinder. The shoulder down to the chest section is a pentagon. It's a hexagon, actually. It's just flat in some areas. And then our sleeves, following true with most of Reigna's other shape language, is going to be triangular. You know, vaguely triangular. Except for the places where the sleeves actually meet up here. So we get this, like, weird four-sided polygon, more or less. And the bottom of this is going to functionally be a square. Because all the excess material that's getting tucked away, we never see. So, this shirt, and, you know, for the collar section, we also have this very simple isosceles triangle. Yeah, we're gonna learn some geometry terminology, guys. Hope you like that. And now if I take this and move it down, you can see the shape and how these two shapes are related. And of course, there are some circular elements, so we'll just overlap some circles into the areas where they matter. And that's how we get all of our primary shapes on our shirt. So I'm going to merge down onto this layer. I'm going to circle these two things. I'm going to shrink this a little bit and do a little transform. And I'm going to take everything that I just said about this thing, I'm going to basically write down for my own reference. And if we use the original image as a reference, welcome in. I can't stop looking at these little emotes because it looks like they're dancing to the fucking music. But if we use the original reference image real quick, again, using what we did in the previous, we can build basically we can build a directional flow diagram to show us how the sleeves flow down from the shoulder. So we start here. And then we get this little like overhang, which matters. We'll get to all of that. And now I have to explore something that I've actually never really explored when it comes to Reigna's design, which is her vambraces. Now, when you're talking about like armor, there is a functional and a physical difference between a bracer and a vambrace. The primary difference being a bracer is only forearm protection. A vambrace usually includes a little bit of protection for the back of the hand. There's usually a gauntlet or a glove section to the end of a vambrace. Depending on where you're from, that little glove section does have different names, because gauntlet has a lot of different like terminology and a lot of different context behind it. Because a gauntlet could either be the full piece starting at the hand going all the way back up the forearm. A gauntlet can refer just to the glove section, or I believe it's in the Roman area or like medieval England. that section that's just the glove, if you didn't have the bracer section of it, would be referred to as a cestus, which is basically just a metal reinforced glove. In Reigna's case, they're just van braces, because it's not a full glove at the end, it's actually just a little bit of covering over the back of her hand, and then the forearm section. So, in order to understand the shape of that, I guess we need to talk about arms, and we need to talk about forearms and hands. I fucking hate drawing hands, which is great, because this is my perfect excuse to practice hand simplification. If I were to convert the story that I've been writing into, like, a webcomic type thing, I have no idea what I'd do stylistically for it. There's a deep part of me that would want to simplify Reigna and just have her be this little chibi going through all of this awful shit with the occasional, like, full-page spread where everything is illustrated in a more, like, natural, realistic fashion. But instead of doing that, I've opted to for now, just explore the designs as is. You see I set my pen color to green. Whenever I'm doing general sketches for characters, I usually assign a color to characters when I'm doing sketches for them. So, in Reigna's case, her character color is green. It's her primary color. It's the color I most associate with her. So, which is weird because, like, her last name is Larkspur, and Larkspurs, if you've ever seen the flower, don't come in green, but ignore me. That's just one of those times where the name and the design don't lie. So, we're going to simplify these arm shapes a little bit. I have to draw the whole damn torso. This is going to be a fun time. Having that odd realization where I've never drawn a torso without drawing a head first. Well, I'm going to start by drawing an egg. This little egg shape. Arch of the rib cage. Don't remember the scientific name for this, but there is a name. And we get our shoulders in, little ovals at the top. You can also just do circles. I tend to do circles depending, but you know, it is what it is. We're talking about like body proportions. Your distance from your shoulder to your elbow and from your elbow to your wrist joint should be the same length. So and draw a little T-pose here. This is like fairly realistic proportioning, but you know, if you're ever worried about these things not looking right when you're doing it yourself, again, you just got to worry about shape flow. Like, all of your shapes should flow into each other. General rule of thumb when you're drawing arms and legs, you have wherever your origin point is, which, like, with your arms is going to be in your shoulders. So you have this little, like, ovular shape at the top where the shoulder is. There's going to be a divot in here where the bicep begins. And then you follow that down. You make a curve down to where the elbow would be. And then you just draw another one down to where your wrist would be. When you're looking at the arm as a simplified shape, you're going to have two areas. You're basically going to have two primary sections. One section's going to be fairly straight, while the other one's going to have a little bit of rhythm to it. And of course, you can always exaggerate and explore further when it comes to that. Now, one of the things that I'm doing as a challenge to myself while doing this, because I tend to cheat sometimes when I'm doing like character sheets and things, is I'm resisting my natural urge for this to be like, oh, I drew this thing. Let me just grab the selection tool, circle this, copy, paste, flip it, and put the other one on the other side. I'm resisting the urge to do that and just trying to hone and refine the ability to draw symmetrically because I've gotten very lazy with doing that. So I'm purposefully making things more complicated for myself. Which I think if you're doing personal art, you know, do your thing. Do it however works for you. The whole point of this exercise is exploring things. I'm also I'm going out of my way to not flip the canvas as well. Because, like, I can draw things on this side just fine because that's my dominant side. So, and anything I draw on the right side is usually fine. It's the left side that fucks me up. So, I'm very purposefully trying to get in a little bit more practice with that. So, basically just going to do that. And now we're going to talk about how these clothes kind of fall over this section of her body. So, I'm just going to put in a little indicator here for her neck. This is not going to be anatomically correct. I'm just generally putting in a shape here that's going to be a stand-in for character neck. Her neck is not this long and not this thin. Reigna's got weirdly chubby proportions in places, particularly in her face. So, put the neck in. We're really just using the neck as a landmark so I can show you where the collar goes. So, Reigna's collar goes right there. We got our little button. And a little V-shape cutout. And then her actual sleeves. Now, there's going to be two major things that are different here from drawing the silhouette of just the shirt itself. And that's the fact that Reigna has two pieces of armor that fall over this upper section of her torso. One being she does have this big leather cuirass. Which has this little, like, V-shape cutout in it. And then this shape is reinforced here because around these little areas in the full color version of her character illustration, these areas have this little gray section because there's like some steel strips that are inlaid between the leather. It's not a lot, but there's at least like a small thin layer of either steel or aluminum, I haven't quite decided, in between the layers of the leather. So this thing is actually a lot heavier than it looks. That's purely a design choice. I don't know if that particular type of armor actually existed, at least not in the way that I'm designing it. So I just took some creative liberties because It's called fantasy for a fucking reason. If anyone has an issue with the shit that I'm doing not being completely historically accurate, eat my ass. Then if you want historically accurate fantasy, then either go read some of the fantasy that already exists, or write your own. I'm tired of people writing fantasy and trying to make it historically accurate with like parallels to real world events. I don't care. I'm reading fantasy to escape the shit that's going on. Please stop trying to teach me history while I'm reading fantasy. I don't want to read a story about the War of the Roses with your copyrighted flags included in Game of Thrones. And we have an ad about to start. What am I looking for? Oh. I was gonna zoom out so I could actually see the rest of my fucking design. So then, here we do bell shape down. Ad breaks over. I'll just give you guys a little verbal description of what I did while y'all were away. So basically drew the bell shape for her actual sleeve, added in her little rope that's used to hold it in place. Then I started working on the actual bracer shape, which one thing that you'll notice whenever I draw bracers personally, I always make sure that the shape of the bracer accentuates that natural curve shape of the wrist for two reasons. One being, if you've ever actually worn bracers, it's what they do. They have to be made in this weird, like, kind of cone shape to accommodate the whole of your forearm and wrist. And also it just adds more of, I guess for lack of a better word, it adds more of an edge to what you're drawing. So that way you can actually better define and see that shape. It's also why I'm not feeling like as much of a stickler as far as like the underlying structure here, because everything that I just drew is going to get covered up by the clothes that are on top anyway. And you'll see that, like, where the bracers are, there's going to be a little bit more overhang to imply that, like, parts of the sleeve are kind of tucked down in there. And then when we get to the bottom section, this is where we actually have to worry about drawing the damn hand. We're drawing her hand sideways here. So usually when I'm drawing hands from this angle, I'll usually start with this weird, like, kind of curved, pentagon shape. Thumb goes here. Thumb has a different style of joint from every other finger on your hand. Your thumb has a specialized joint in it called a saddle joint, which is why the thumb does the weird movements that it does. So you can generally simplify the area where the thumb is into a triangle if you want to. And the rest of the hand, we can get this little triangular shape out of it. And then we just kind of extrapolate. I am very bad at drawing individual fingers. Then we get into the detail of how Reigna's hands actually look. She has these little, like, fingerless leather gloves that go on underneath the vambrace. And then there's a joint in between these two sections. And there's a steel plate that goes across the back of her hand. And that's her whole hand protection. Now, I've designed this way for two reasons when it comes to Reigna's character design. For one, giving her this little, like, weird-shaped steel plate across the back of one of her hands gives me an easy landmark that I can use to kind of develop the rest of her hand whenever I'm drawing her. That's my Doyleist reason for doing it. The actual, like, in-character reason for it is, like, obviously the armor that she wears does have this little bit of steel plating here and there. She doesn't actually use it as armor. In a lot of Reigna's design, if we look at the full body sketch, let me just pull that up. She has a little triangle on the end of her tail that she tends to wear, that she uses for performances. She uses the steel plate on the back of her hand armor to tap that triangle when she's performing. So that way it gets a more pure sound when she hits it. So that's the other thing is, like, you know, when we're talking about character design, you know, you look at think about, you know, if you're someone who drew a lot when you were a kid, everybody had that phase where the characters they drew had the most nonsensical fucking outfits you've ever seen. You know, very Final Fantasy-esque, where it's like, oh, there's a lot of asymmetrical elements, there's lots of belts and chains and things that just really don't need to be there. I think that's because there was a lot of us who were just broke and really wanted to own a pair of pants from Hot Topic, but just couldn't afford to buy them. So, you drew characters wearing something like that. And when you're doing, like, actual character design for a purpose, whether you're designing characters for games, webcomics, you know, visual novels, just stories of any kind, if you want to illustrate characters that you're designing, you should always know what kind, like, you know, you should always ask yourself questions like, what climate is this character going to be in? What does this character do as a profession? what are the trappings of this character's profession? Like, what are things that they would need to carry on them at all times, or things that they would need to, things they would need to wear, carry, or utilize on a regular basis? What are some things that should always be at hand for this person? So in Reigna's case, she's a bard. So, I have her wear a poet's shirt. I understand, like, oh yeah, she uses the steel plate on the back of her hands to hit her triangle. Part of her actual character design is that she carries her lute on her back. And she has like little tambourines wrapped around the upper section of her tail. And that's all stuff that I didn't think about the first time I drew her, which is why her design looks kind of boring and plain. But as I refined the design, I started thinking about, like, how would you handle that? Those are just questions that you should ask when you're doing your character design stuff. What elements of your character wears clothes and carries equipment with them? How does that manifest? What does that actually look like? So we're looking at this little upper torso section. This is what it kind of looks like straight on. So I am going to add a layer above, change to black, adjust my stabilization preference, and now we're just going to line this real quick. This is basically how I do it if I was actually going to use this as an illustration. We don't really have to get into the nitty-gritty of any of that because it's all art program stuff. And it's going to look a little bit different depending on your program. Now, I use Procreate personally. I like Procreate a lot. It does have its problems. One of the big issues that I have with Procreate realistically is when it comes to maintaining line quality. Because if you have to like transform or move things around, your line quality will degrade significantly. As you can see here, like on the original canvas this is from, this doesn't have these like jagged pixelated edges like this artifacting. This has only happened because I've taken this out of its original canvas, resized it, and moved it elsewhere. This happens in Procreate because Procreate does not support vector layers. Because Clip Studio Paint supports vector layers and most things in Clip Studio, if you do it as if you save a vector canvas, your line quality will be maintained regardless of actual pixel resolution. In Procreate, everything's rasterized, so everything that you do, you can fuck up your pixel quality just by moving things too often. I do have the canvas settings for I think 600 DPI, because if I go any higher than that, it affects how many layers I'm allowed to have on the canvas. Just for shits and giggles. We go back. I have all these different canvases. These ones that are up here, Square, 4K, A4, 4x6, Photo, and Comic. All of those are the default one and screen size. These are all default in Procreate. Everything from this untitled canvas down is all stuff that I've added. These are all canvases that I've made for specifications. Like, I have the different emote ones, because Twitch emotes have 3 different sizes that you have to make art for. I have had to adjust the DPI for all of them, so I've moved them all up to 600. I'm depending on how they look, next time I go to draw emotes, I might adjust it further just to make sure that quality is maintained. But my primary one that I use is the one that I have labeled as YouTube time-lapse. Almost all of my drawings are done on that canvas. It's one of the larger canvases that I can have without it negatively impacting the number of layers I can have. And if we look at that one, 1620 by 2160, 600 DPI, gives me a maximum of 72 layers. My maximum canvas size, or the largest canvas size that Procreate will support for me, is this one right here that I have labeled as character sheet. This is the one that I use when if someone commissions me and orders a full character sheet with like expressions and everything, this is the canvas I use for that. This is the largest canvas that Procreate supports on this model of my iPad. This is the highest resolution I can have, because anything beyond this, it will basically break down and be completely fucking useless. And it gives me a maximum of 22 layers at 600 DPI. Oh no, there we go. Almost deleted my thing. It's a lot of work. So yeah, I know that most people I know use Clip Studio. Most artists that I watch use Clip Studio. Except for like the really weird ones that still use Photoshop. But I know that a lot of people that were using Photoshop have since converted to Clip Studio. Or a lot of the people that I know, at least, that used Photoshop have moved to Clip Studio. I know that the YouTube artists Jazza and Mark Burnett, I believe, both still use Photoshop. I think Drawfee has primarily transitioned over to using Clip Studio. They don't really seem to use Photoshop as much anymore. But like really early Drawfee exclusively worked in Photoshop. But Photoshop is still kind of like an industry standard program, to my understanding. Which is why I think I'd be in a lot of trouble if I actually like started doing actual work, or started like trying to look for actual art jobs. I don't think I could actually do most of them anyway. I don't think my skill is quite there. But I'd be in trouble because I don't know how to fucking use Photoshop. And it would just be a very frustrating experience overall. Because, yeah, Procreate is not considered an industry standard program. Clip Studio isn't either, but I think there's more transferable skills using something like Clip Studio. I will also say, if you're somebody looking to get into digital art and you want to do like animation stuff, as much as I love Procreate and like Procreate's built-in animation assist, because you can use Procreate as is to animate, which is pretty sick. Procreate does have an external program called Procreate Dreams for animation. I don't really like Procreate Dreams. I think they cooked too much. They trimmed out a little bit too much of actual Procreate, and it makes Dreams a little bit clunky, in my opinion. So, you know, if you're someone who uses Procreate and you want to animate, just keep using Procreate. Don't use Procreate Dreams if you can help it. Unless you really want to experiment with it, in which case, it's like $10. You know, I don't think spending $10 on an exploratory purchase is a bad thing. I mean, for fuck's sake, I did it. But I can also say that I wouldn't take Dreams over baseline Procreate. And I know that like the animation suite in Clip Studio is apparently very good. I've given it a cursory look over. It does look really fucking cool and kind of robust. I just don't have the patience to learn Clip Studio. And honestly, it's not even learning Clip Studio as much as it's learning the hardware of my other tablet. I want to get one of those little external controllers for the tablet, so that way I can like zoom and use hotkeys with one hand. Because like with Procreate, I'm used to being able to do stuff like this, where I can just pinch to zoom and like move my canvas around. And you can't do that in Clip Studio on a regular graphics tablet because it's not a touchscreen. So that's one of the big barriers of frustration that I find myself contending with a lot with Clip Studio. Also, the other fun part about my bad habit of drawing characters with their fingerless gloves, for the most part, is it gives me another little landmark that I can use when it comes to drawing the character's hand, because it gives me an excuse to break the finger up a little bit. I'm gonna give myself some grace for this left hand, or for this whole left side. This is my first time in a long time drawing a body like this. So, give me a break. Fucking hell. Then we get to do the fun thing, and we do a further shape breakdown. So now we're looking at torso as shapes. So, primary shape here, basically just a big ol' rectangle for this middle section of the body. Sleeves make these little triangular shapes off the side. There's no underhang from here. Normally, since Reigna is a girl, we wouldn't want to imply like something as far as like generally like breast shape, but first off, Reigna is a very like, what's the word I'm looking for? She's a very like thin built girl. On top of that, this like center cuirass that she wears is fairly binding. So we're not drawing a piece of leather armor that's going to have a big ass area of cleavage busting out of it. Wouldn't be a very good piece of armor. Also, not really what the character herself is going for in her clothing and design. Because, like, there's definitely some bards in the world who probably dress in that way. Reigna's not one of those characters. As a person, she's very peculiar about how she makes her money and how she garners attention through her performances, and has basically adopted a whole thing about, like, going out of her way to not use like her sexuality as a means of garnering attention during performances. That's a in-world character preference for the character. That is not to say that Reigna is not a horny bard, because she absolutely is. It's just that it's a whole thing where it's like, being a horny bard is for off stage. On stage, we only do that if it's part of the show. But yeah. And if we go down here to these sections, we have more of these little triangular shapes. Or, triangular leaning four-sided polygons. Kind of trapezoidal. That's actually a better way to put it. So these little forearms are gonna have this like trapezoid shape to them. And the overall silhouette of her hands is going to be something kind of like this. Vaguely. Kind of like a weird little chisel. And mind you, this is purely my notes for myself. This is how I'm processing it for my own sake. Someone else will probably describe this significantly better to you. But, you know, if this is at all useful, then why not? If somebody else can look at this and make sense of the stupid shit that I'm saying, then it's a win-win. Everybody gets a little bit of value out of it. And there's nothing we like more than creating value around here. Now we're just gonna do a little bit of little hand study here real quick. I have watched a sickening amount of videos over my life on how to draw hands. The old anime hand cheat. Want to simplify your hand drawing? Take your middle and your ring fingers and make sure that they're touching. Make this little triangular shape out of the two of them. And, you know, make sure that you remember that your pinky and your index finger are shorter than your middle and ring fingers. And remember that your middle finger is your longest. At least it should be. There used to be an old, in the Dark Ages, there was this whole thing about, like, if you want to identify a werewolf, then the werewolf's ring finger should be longer than their middle finger. Needless to say, that is not a thing that commonly happens. Oh, we got another ad going. An excuse to practice drawing hands on their own. I'm flexing my finger in a weird way to try and figure out this particular hand shape. Reina's primary instrument training is lute, so she's a lutenist. I'm trying to like figure out a chord shape with my left hand, and it's hard for me to envision how the joints are gonna look without actually like walking across the room and pulling my guitar out of its case to like hold a chord. So I'm just trying to do it from memory. Don't do what I do. Please use references. I'm just doing it here because I don't want to spend time looking for references. There you go, very, very rough chord shape. It was my first time trying to draw a hand in this particular position. No. Just banging out some quick hand shapes. I don't know, for 3 hands I drew off the top of my head from memory. I feel pretty good about those. Oh, jeez. Oh. We'll talk about like actual items and accessories as like its own study page, I think. Especially because I'm now realizing there's a lot of Reigna's equipment I've never drawn on its own. Because I tend to not draw inanimate objects. I'm the wrong person to ask if you're talking about still life stuff. It's not a thing I do typically. And now we do legs. Legs. Now the question is, do I want to do this today or do I want to save it for tomorrow? That is always the hard choice. This will probably be tomorrow's study topic. Yeah, between my 3 a.m. sleep deprivation and today, I got 2 whole pages of notes looking at this character's design and exploring her simplification. At the end of this, after I do the legs, then for one of the next ones, after the leg study's done, we'll try and do a full top-down drawing of the character, see if like I actually understand what I think I understand about her design. See if this was, useful and if I learned anything from it. Also, just as a note for future streams, there are a couple things that I just want to go over. For, I guess, what'll be tomorrow and probably Friday night stream. If we're doing an art stream, you can suggest stuff. And, if at any point you're just not interested in the topic that I'm talking about, or if we reach a point like this where I'm not sure I want to continue doing, an explanation or exploratory type drawing for the day, at any point you can just suggest something and I will do my best to try and draw some iteration of it. So I think that's a fun way to just get everyone involved. That, I do still have the thing going on that I guess isn't really advertised anywhere, which is that, if you're somebody who subscribes, you know, when you subscribe, I will send you my link for Ko-fi. And you can send me a DM on there. And, you know, anybody who subscribes, I will do a little character portrait for you. And to give you an example of what I'm talking about when I say that, I mean, if you subscribe, if you subscribe to the channel, you get one of these. These are the D&D token portraits I did for my player party. Anybody who decides to subscribe to the Twitch channel, you get one of these. It's just simple line art. It's just a simple illustration of your character, like flat line art. And I'll even add a little like floral design to the background if you have one in mind. Because that's just kind of a fun thing. I thought it'd be a fun addition. Also, if I take this away, you can see that this is a spider lily back here. I have the problem of I hate drawing botanicals and plants, but I really like flowers. So I want an excuse to draw more flowers, so I can try and practice it more. It'll probably be one of the study topics at some point. But yeah. So, you know, $5 for a subscription gets you one of those cool little drawings. Or you could just commission them directly from my Ko-fi page. I think those ones on Ko-fi, I think, are like $10. I do the same thing on VGen as well. I haven't made a command for VGen yet. Yeah, if any of that sounds interesting, you know, feel free to subscribe. I do have to rework my sub goals. I haven't actually thought about them in a long time, but we're going to work on that. We'll probably do that on Friday. We'll sit down and have a talk about what the sub goals look like. And between now and then, I'll actually think about them. But that said, thank you guys for coming out tonight. I'm probably going to get off and go actually make some food because I still haven't. Because I just didn't feel like cooking earlier. I still don't, but if I don't cook, I'm not going to eat. So I'm going to go handle that. But again, thanks for coming and hanging out, watching me draw, listening to me yap. If you're just now arriving and you want to know what happened, I'll be posting the VOD to YouTube. I'll just put a YouTube link in here now, actually, while I'm yapping still. So there we go. Oh man, this is moving super slow. I think there's a link for my YouTube somewhere on the channel anyway, so that's also an option instead of, doing all this. There it is. So, the YouTube VOD for this will be up later tonight or tomorrow, whenever I get around to doing it. The VOD will also be live as soon as I go off, because I'll usually just hit the button to publish the VOD to Twitch. So if you missed it and you want to check it out, it'll be here. It'll be on YouTube. Like I said, between now on Friday, we'll talk a little bit about what I might do for sub goals. I'll take drawing suggestions or whatever. My brain is failing me right now, so excuse me. At some point, I'll probably, like, once we finish all the stuff that I'm doing right now for the character design stuff, probably redesign the channel emotes and stuff, because I kind of want to redesign them. They look a little bit sloppy, and I'm not super happy about it. So, that's probably what we're going to do this week. I don't know. We'll work from there. There will be no stream. I need to open up my calendar real quick just so I can gauge it properly. From the week of the 14th through to the 21st, there will be no streams during that week because I'm not going to be in town. I'm not going to have access to my setup or anything. If I do any drawings while I'm out, I will still be posting time lapses to YouTube. I'll still post updates to Blue Sky because that's just what I do. But yeah, as always, thanks for coming out. I'll catch you guys tomorrow. And yeah, have a great rest of your night.